Hey everyone. So today we're diving deep into an institution that's been at the very core of humanity for, well, millennia. But here's the thing, it's also one of the most misunderstood. We're talking about marriage. And I promise you, its real story is way more complex and surprising than you probably think. All right, let's kick things off with what feels like a super simple question. What is marriage, really? You probably have an answer ready to go, but for anthropologists, oh man, this question has been fueling debates for centuries. Turns out, finding one single definition that fits every single culture across all of human history, well, it's turned out to be pretty much impossible. And yeah, this table right here really shows you why it's so tough. You have major thinkers like George Murdoch who saw it as a practical thing, living together, sharing economic duties. Then Kathleen Goff came along and argued it's all about making sure kids have a legitimate spot in society. And then you've got Edmund Leach, who basically threw up his hands and said, forget a single definition. For him, it was more like a flexible bundle of rights that looks different everywhere you go. It really seems like the second you try to make a rule about what marriage is, you find a culture that's already breaking it. Okay, so here's the game plan for today. We're going to really dig into this whole definition problem. Then we'll get into the unwritten rules, the who can you marry question. We'll ask if marriage is really about one partner or if it can be many. We'll uncover the real purpose of the union, and finally, we'll connect all the dots between marriage, money, and power. Every single society has this sort of invisible rulebook for marriage, these really powerful norms that literally shape the community. And it all kicks off with one rule that you can find almost everywhere on the entire planet. And that one rule, the big one, is the incest taboo. It's basically the universal no when it comes to marrying or having relationships with close blood relatives. Now, part of this is biological, right, to avoid genetic issues, but it's also deeply social. Think about it. Forcing people to marry outside their immediate family is a brilliant way to build bigger social networks, create alliances, and keep the peace. Okay, so once you get past that one major taboo, societies have this big choice to make. Do we marry in or do we marry out? The first one is called endogamy. That's the rule that says you have to marry inside your own group. It's a fantastic way to keep wealth, culture, and identity all bundled up together. The total opposite is exogamy, where the rule is you must marry outside your group. This is all about building bridges, creating alliances, and spreading those genetic resources around. And these rules, they can also be all about climbing the social ladder. There's a term, hypergamy, which is when a woman marries a man of a higher social or economic class, and historically, that was often encouraged. But hypogamy, the exact reverse, where a woman marries down, that has traditionally been a huge no-no. I mean, it's such a clear example of how marriage roles are literally used to patrol and maintain social hierarchies. So we've got rules about who you can marry. But what about how many? We tend to automatically think of marriage as two people, right? A couple. But here's the thing. Has that really been the norm for humanity throughout our history? This idea of one person for life, it feels totally normal to us, right? It feels like the default setting. But if we actually peel back the layers and look at the anthropological record across thousands of societies, a very, very different picture starts to emerge. And it's a surprising one. Whoa. Okay, so this chart right here, it's kind of a bombshell. This is from George Murdoch's huge cross-cultural study, and just look at that. In the societies that he surveyed, a mind-blowing 83% practiced polygyny. That's one man with multiple wives. Monogamy was the standard in only 16%. The takeaway here is absolutely undeniable. Monogamy is actually a pretty recent trend. It is not the historical default for our species. So what exactly is polygyny? It's when one man is married to multiple women at the same time. And, back in the day, this had almost nothing to do with what we think of as romance. It was all about strategy. It was a symbol of your wealth and your status. It was a way to create alliances with a bunch of different families. And honestly, it was a really practical system for managing a big household and all the labor that comes with it. And then you get the super, super rare flip side, polyandry. This is where one woman has multiple husbands, and very often it's a group of brothers. But get this, it's not random at all. In places like Tibet, it was an incredibly clever economic strategy. It was designed to stop the family farm from getting sliced up into smaller and smaller, basically useless plots of land with every new generation. All of this really leads us to a much bigger question. If marriage historically wasn't always about love, and it wasn't even always about just two people, then what was the point of it all? Why did human societies even invent this thing?
So the anthropologist Edmund Leach had this great way of looking at it. He saw marriage as a kind of social Swiss Army knife that does a whole bunch of important jobs all at once. It establishes who the legal parents of a child are. It often gives spouses exclusive sexual rights to each other. It gives people rights to each other's labor, to each other's property. But maybe most importantly, it creates a joint fund for raising kids. And, this is crucial, it forges a formal alliance, something called affinity, between two entire families, two whole kin groups.
And those functions, especially the ones about property and alliances, they weren't just based on a friendly handshake. They were often sealed with a transfer of wealth, which just goes to show you marriage has always been, at its very core, an economic institution. Okay, when I say marriage payment, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Probably a dowry, right? Well, take a look at this. According to Murdoch's data, the single most common form of marriage payment across all these cultures, by a huge margin, is actually the exact opposite, bride wealth. So what's the big difference here? It's simple. Just follow the money. With bride wealth, the groom's family gives wealth to the bride's family. It's like compensation for losing her labor and fertility, and it actually raises her status. A dowry is the reverse. The bride's family sends wealth with her to the new couple or to the groom's family. And while it can be seen as her share of the family inheritance, it has often created huge social pressure and some serious gender bias. And this is where things get really, really wild. To solve some very specific problems, societies have come up with some incredible forms of marriage. I mean, look at this. Among the newer people, a woman can marry the ghost of a dead man just to keep his family line going. The Nandi have female husbands, where an older woman without a male heir can marry a younger woman to have children for her lineage. The Nair had visiting husbands, so kids belonged only to their mother's clan. And in Japan, there's a thing called adoptive marriage to bring a son-in-law into the family to keep the family business and name alive. These exceptions just prove marriage isn't some rigid box. It's a flexible toolkit. So after all that, what's the one big thing you should walk away with? It's this. Marriage is not one thing. It's not a monolith. It is an incredibly flexible, dynamic, cultural tool that human societies have shaped and reshaped for thousands of years to solve some of our most basic problems: inheritance, labor, alliances, and family. And that, of course, brings us all the way back to today. Marriage is changing again, right now, with all sorts of new ideas about love, gender, and individual choice. But when you think about its incredibly flexible past, the real question isn't just about what marriage was. The real question is, what are we going to make it next?